Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Every award, every late-night sacrifice gone unnoticed while my brothers basked in my parents' praise. My only ally was Grandma, whose gentle smile was the only warmth I ever knew. Until the night I left that empty house. I ran straight into the woman my parents fired years ago, their maid who held a secret that shattered my world. I wasn't their blood child. And in that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside, a white picket fence, manicured lawn, and windows that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Inside, though, I was always the shadow. From the moment I learned to crawl, my two brothers claimed every corner of my parents' attention. Their laughter echoed through the halls whenever they brought home trophies or stories of triumph, while I stood quietly in the foyer, clutching my own achievements invisible. Every day began the same way. I'd tiptoe downstairs, heart pounding, hoping to catch my mother's eye as she flipped pancakes. She would nod absently and return to her coffee. My father, already dressed in his crisp suit, would pat my brothers on the back and ask, "What's the plan for today, champions?" And I would freeze at the doorway, the steam from my mug fogging my vision, wondering if I should even be there. My room was the only place that felt like mine, walls plastered with sketches and stories I poured my heart into. But it was Grandma's kitchen where I truly breathed. She was the one who knelt beside me on her creaky blue chair, smoothing my hair and whispering, "You're my brilliant girl. Don't ever forget that." Her warm hands smelled of chamomile and old recipe cards. When she pinned a fresh daisy to my dress before school, I stood a little taller, convinced for a moment that maybe, just maybe, I belonged. Then came the winter Grandma fell ill. I remember the hush that swallowed our home the night we found her in bed, still as snow, outside the window. My parents argued in low voices. No tears, just the sound of urgent footsteps. I tiptoed into Grandma's room and slipped her hand into mine. "Please don't go," I murmured, but her eyes only fluttered once. The next morning, the world outside glittered under ice, but inside, the light had died. At her funeral, I stood stiffly beside my brothers, the cold breeze biting my cheeks. I watched as everyone offered condolences to my parents. They must be devastated while I clutched the single daisy she'd given me, now drooping in my trembling fist. No one looked at me. No one said my name. The coffin closed and the hush deepened. It was as if by losing her, I lost permission to exist. Weeks passed, and the void Grandma left behind yawned wider. At dinner, I would rehearse my lines. I got all A's, I won the art contest, but my words shattered against faces staring down at phones. I learned to swallow the ache, my chest tightening every time the silence stretched too long. My brothers bickered and teased each other, but when I dared raise my voice, my father would shoot me a distracted glance, the muscles in his jaw clenching before he turned away. Still, I held on to the memory of Grandma's smile, soft, unwavering, full of pride. In my mind, I could still feel her hand on my shoulder, her whispered promise that I mattered. It fed a tiny spark inside me, even as the rest of the house felt like a prison. I began to write plans in a tattered notebook, after lights out goals, hopes, dreams of a life where I wouldn't be invisible. But every time I closed that book, reality slapped me back into the passenger seat of my own story. This was my world, a perfect facade concealing a heart shriveling in neglect. Yet somewhere beneath the weight of their indifference, a determination was growing. If they would not notice me, I would make them. And when they finally realized who I would no longer be the child standing at the edge, waiting for crumbs of attention. I would stand center stage on terms of my own. From the moment Grandma was gone, the silence in our house grew heavier. It wasn't peaceful. It felt oppressive, like the walls themselves were pressing in. Every evening I'd set the table with extra care, polished silverware, perfectly folded napkins, a wildflower from the yard placed just so. I'd watch from the kitchen doorway as my mother and father settled in, my brothers cracking jokes, leaning close, stealing laughs and warmth that should have been mine. My mother would glance at me, lips curving into a polite smile, then look away. My father never looked my way at all. One night, buoyed by a desperate hope, I presented him with the mock-up for my first freelance design project, a glossy brochure advertising a charity event I'd spent weeks perfecting. My heart thundered as I pushed it toward him across the dining table. He flipped through the pages, once muttered an absent "huh, looks nice," then raised his glass to my brother Kyle, who'd just landed a weekend internship. I sat frozen, the brochure heavy in my lap like an accusation. That winter, I surprised my mother with a hand-knit scarf in her favorite blue. I had measured carefully chosen soft yarn, counted every stitch. When I wrapped it around her shoulders at Christmas, she smoothed one finger over the fringe, nodded in a way that said she'd rather have anything else, then turned to help Kyle open a gift from their favorite aunt. I stood there, scarf draped over my arms, feeling the yarn tighten around my chest. Meanwhile, my brother's achievements piled up like trophies. Ethan's high school football MVP award mounted on the wall, Kyle's charm netting him friends everywhere he went. Their laughter spilled through the halls each evening, a constant reminder that someone else was the golden child. I began to dread dinner. The very thought of chairs scraping the floor made my stomach twist. At Grandma's birthday in late spring, I carved a wooden frame to hold our only photo together, her next to me on that old blue chair. I presented it after dinner, my voice soft, hopeful. My mother took it, examined it, and set it aside on a side table near the door. "Nice work," she said, already walking away. My father didn't even notice it. By midsummer, the pattern was ritual. I would rehearse my small announcements in the bathroom mirror. I got into the art program. I sold my first illustration online. But when I spoke, my father's gaze slid right past me, landing on my brother's reflections in the hallway mirror. Each time, the echo of my own voice bounced back at me, hollow and unwanted. Then came the blow I didn't see coming. Graduation day. As I accepted my diploma summa cum laude, I scanned the sea of cheering parents in the audience, searching for my father's proud face. I found it beside my brother's, his head tipped back as he roared at their antics in the stands. He was so busy high-fiving them that when my name was announced, he flinched at the noise, glanced down at his watch, and leaned back dismissive. I walked off the stage with my heart in my throat. That night, I stormed into the kitchen and hurled my cap onto the countertop. "Why do I even try?" I screamed at the empty room. My voice cracked, but no one came to check on me. No one knocked on the door. My tears stained the granite. In that moment, the seed of doubt sprouted. Did they ever love me? Weeks later, at the charity gala I'd designed, I saw my parents in the lobby, smiling proud, posing for photographs with a businessman who'd just pledged 6 figures. They introduced him as our son's dinner companion, then drifted away into a circle of congratulatory applause. No mention of my design, no flicker of recognition. I waited by the display board, breath caught, until an event coordinator gently guided me aside. "That's Mr. Halston. He'd like to see your work." "Sorry, it's time for us to wrap up." They whisked me toward the exit like an afterthought. On the drive home, the city lights stretched like mocking stars through the windshield. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my nails bit into my palms. My chest tightened, each inhale sharp as broken glass. I could taste disappointment, metallic bitter on my tongue. By the time I reached home, I was trembling. I pounded on my bedroom door until my mother opened it. She peered at me, bleary-eyed. I held up the invitation to the gala's VIP after-party. "They invited?" "Everyone," I whispered, voice raw. "Everyone except me." She blinked at me, confused, then closed the door. That night, I lay on Grandma's blue chair, her chair running my fingers over the worn fabric. The scent of chamomile and old recipe cards still clung faintly to its arms. I closed my eyes and felt her gentle warmth, remembered her words, "You matter. You always matter." The ache in my chest twisted deeper. I realized that if I kept waiting for them to notice me, I'd die here unseen. And so I made a choice. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my grandfather's old briefcase from under the bed, stuffed it with notebooks, plans, and the small inheritance Grandma left me. I typed an email to a mentor, someone who believed in my talent, and clicked send. Outside, the street was silent. The breeze carried the scent of lilac from Grandma's garden. I breathed it in, feeling that spark of determination. Flare, Grandma loved me. She always had. And now I would make them see me. As I closed the front door softly behind me, my reflection in the glass remained a girl, once invisible, stepping into the night, with everything to prove. I walked down our silent street, under a sky heavy with clouds, clutching Grandma's briefcase like a lifeline. My breath formed little ghosts in the cold air, each one a reminder that I had nowhere left to go except forward. I turned the corner and froze. On the cracked sidewalk stood Ms. Tui, the woman who had cared for me as a child, smoothing my hair, teaching me words, baking sweet dumplings in Grandma's kitchen. I hadn't seen her since my parents dismissed her without a word. She looked up at me, her eyes reflecting street lamp halos. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. Her voice still felt like home. My heart stuttered. "Why are you here?" I whispered. She motioned me to follow. We slipped into a dim cafe that smelled of coffee and old dust. The barista expecting her poured 2 cups without a word. Ms. Tui slid into the booth opposite me. I sat shaking, wondering if this was another cruel trick. "Your mother asked me to meet you," she began. The words landed like stones in my chest. "She said you left without saying goodbye." My stomach twisted. Why would my mother care? "When I left your family," Tui continued, "I never stopped thinking about you. Grandma begged them to keep you close. She said you were special. That bed of daisies on the day you were born proved you were meant to bloom here." I closed my eyes. A flower I had no memory of daisies at birth. Grandma was gone. There was no one left to confirm it. My pulse pounded. "What are you saying?" Ms. Tui reached into her coat and pulled out a small, folded envelope, faded cream paper sealed with a pressed pansy. My name was scrawled on the front in Grandma's unmistakable looping script. I recognized the handwriting more than the pansy. Grandma always pressed flowers from her garden. I tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a birth certificate, not mine, but another baby's name scratched out and replaced with mine. The true child's name, smudged but legible, stared back at me. "They adopted you," Tui said quietly, "because Grandma couldn't bear to lose you. Your mother, she was told she couldn't have more children. Grandma pressed them to adopt her granddaughter, and they agreed. My world spun. Adoption. All this time I had believed I was the unwanted one, the third child, when in fact I was the one my grandmother fought to protect. My chest felt hollow, then flooded. The grief I'd buried for so long, the loss of Grandma's love mingled with the betrayal of my parents, rose like acid in my throat. Tears stung my eyes, but I forced them back. "Why tell me now?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. Miss Tui's gaze was steady. "I promised Grandma I'd stay by your side. She knew this secret would tear you apart. She feared your heart more than death itself. But it's time you knew the truth." I stood and backed away, heart hammering. All the dinners I'd tried to shine, all the awards I'd painstakingly hung on the wall, had been for people who never saw me. My birthright, my very identity, had been stolen before I even drew breath. The cafe clock ticked. I heard my own ragged breathing. I reached for the envelope again, unfolding another letter, Grandma's final words. "My dearest light, you are the spark I could not let die. Though your parents do not know, your place in this world is secured by love. Live boldly, and do not wait for those who blind themselves to your light." In that moment, I felt her presence beside me, a warm hand on my shoulder, the scent of chamomile thick in the air. The ache inside sharpened into resolve. They had lied to me, neglected me, erased me, and now I knew exactly why. I rose fully, slamming the briefcase shut. My reflection in the cafe window showed a girl reborn, eyes bright, shoulders squared. I tucked the letters into my coat and stepped back into the night. Each footstep felt electrified with purpose. I would stop chasing their pity and approval. I would build something so unmistakable that no one could ever deny my worth again. They had taken my name, my place, my truth, but they could never steal my determination. With the envelope tucked against my heart, I whispered to the empty street, "For you, Grandma, I will make them see me." And under the watchful glow of the street lamps, I set my course toward a life where I would be remembered, where I would stand tall, and where they would at last have to look at me and know exactly who I am. I sat in the booth of a quiet diner far from home, neon light flickering against the vinyl seat. My fingers drummed on the laminated tabletop, each tap echoing like a countdown. I opened Grandma's briefcase again, the creak of leather sounding like the hinge of a long-buried door swinging open at last. Inside lay my tattered notebook, filled with scribbled ideas, dreams of design logos, pitch decks. Tonight, those rough notes would become my battle plan. First, reconnaissance. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through past years of company announcements my parents had celebrated. Press releases, LinkedIn posts, local news articles, every mention of their firm, every quote from my father or brothers. I cataloged the weak spots, an obsolete division. They'd ignored a failed product line. Nobody talked about a legal loophole in their board charter. I could smell opportunity. Next, allies. I called my former university mentor, Dr. Harris, whose expertise in corporate governance was legendary. He answered on the second ring, surprised but not entirely. "You're serious," he said. Yes, I was. I told him I needed access to insiders, people who remembered when Grandma was still alive, who saw me as a child, not an invisible daughter. He connected me with 2 board members, sympathetic to innovation and change. Their interest, revitalizing a stagnant company. Their price voting with me when it mattered most. Meanwhile, I dug up the corporate bylaws stored in the county clerk's online archives. My eyes blurred as I highlighted clauses majority vote required for transfer of executive control. Any family member with substantial equity may call a special resolution. Beneath the bureaucratic language, I uncovered the absolute power Grandma had reserved for her chosen heir, you. Then came capital. I arranged a meeting with the angel investor who had admired my early illustration work. Over strong coffee, I pitched her the vision. Imagine transforming this old-guard family business into a modern tech powerhouse with me at the helm. She asked about numbers, projections, return on investment. I leaned forward, voice steady. I have already lined up the board members. All I need is your funding to secure the shares and execute the plan. By the end of the meeting, she agreed 6 figures wired by week's end. But I needed more than money and legal technicalities. I needed the emotional leverage only Grandma's legacy could provide. I drafted a private letter to each sympathetic board member, snippets of Grandma's wisdom-pressed pansy petals from her garden included, reminding them why she fought so fiercely for me, why she insisted I inherit her seat. I emphasized that by supporting me, they were honoring her last wishes. I watched their replies roll in. We remember her fondly. We owe it to her. As funding cleared, I moved to cement my position. I coordinated with my lawyer to call the special resolution for a board vote. The notice went out under the pretext of strategic restructuring. The language was sterile, but the subtext thundered, "We decide tomorrow who leads this company forward." My heart pounded as I hit send. There was no turning back. Simultaneously, I began a quiet PR campaign. Anonymous industry insiders leaked stories about the company's slow decline, suggestions that a new vision was desperately needed. Trade publications picked it up. Family business at crossroads, will the next generation step up? Comments flooded forums echoing my own narrative. It's time for change. Each article was a drop in the media storm I was conjuring. At home, I waited for the reaction. My parents were oblivious, still celebrating some minor success of my brother's projects. They had no idea their own company's fate was being decided behind closed doors. That was the point they never saw me coming, just as they never saw their adopted daughter's potential. The night before the vote, I sat alone in a boardroom we rented under my mentor's name. The long table sat empty, save for my briefcase, Grandma's letters, and the glimmer of a single overhead lamp. I closed my eyes, visualized the next day, the moment the chairman's gavel fell in my favor, the hush that followed the flicker of recognition in my father's eyes as reality crashed down. My phone buzzed messages from the board members, all set ready to vote with you, for Grandma. Adrenaline rushed through my veins so strong it felt like electricity. I rose, smoothing my jacket. The plan was in motion, the pieces aligned. I wasn't just seeking revenge, I was reclaiming everything they stole: my identity, my right to matter, my grandmother's final wish. I left the diner and walked into the cold night, the briefcase tight in my grip, mind humming with certainty. Tomorrow, the boardroom would be mine. Tomorrow, they would know that the quiet girl who'd vanished into the shadows was the force that would shape their future. I inhaled the crisp air and whispered to the moonlight, "This is for you, Grandma. Watch me bloom." The morning of the showdown arrived gray and still, as though the world itself held its breath. I stood outside the glass doors of the family headquarters, once a sanctuary of my invisibility, now the stage for my reckoning. My briefcase felt impossibly heavy in my hand, laden with legal papers, Grandma's letters, and the cold weight of every slight I had endured. Inside, the boardroom was alive with nervous energy. Plush leather chairs formed a perfect arc around a polished mahogany table. Sunlight slanted through the vertical blinds, sketching stripes across the floor. At the head sat my father, Chest, broad in his tailored suit, flanked by my brothers Ethan's jaw set, Kyle's expression inscrutable. They did not see me enter. They assumed I would not. I paused in the doorway. Every eye snapped to me, jaws dropping almost in unison. My heart hammered, but I lifted my chin and walked forward, heels clicking with purpose. The room stilled the air electric. "Good morning," I said, voice steady as I slid into the chair at the opposite end. Murmurs rippled around me. My father's face tightened. Something like fear flickered in his eyes. My lawyer cleared her throat and placed a single stack of papers in front of me. "Shall we proceed?" she asked. I nodded. The notice for a special resolution lay on top: resolution to approve transfer of controlling shares to Miss Mia Carter. My father's hand trembled as he reached for the document. This, this isn't valid, he stammered. These shares, where did you get the capital to acquire them? I offered him Grandma's birth certificate envelope. This, I said, placing it gently before him, is where I come from, the granddaughter Grandma fought to have. And this, I tapped the top paper, is how I reclaim what she intended for me. Silence. The board members to my left leaned in, flipping through the supporting legal clauses I had highlighted. The reserved rights Grandma had inserted, long buried in fine print, gave her chosen heir authority in the event of default. I had meticulously documented how, after years of neglect, the company had defaulted on certain familial covenants. My intervention was not only legal, but inevitable. Ethan's face went pale. You forged these documents, he accused, voice cracking. I shook my head. No, forging, I replied. Research preparation and Grandma's foresight. She knew they'd try to erase me. I paused so every syllable landed like a blow. Now the question is, will you honor her last wishes? My lawyer called the vote. All in favor of transferring control to Miss Carter, please raise your hands. One by one, 8 of the 10 board members, those I'd courted with letters and petals, lifted their hands. My father's hand froze midair, then slowly dropped. The clerk announced, motion carried. A pin dropped. Chairs scraped as my father leaned back, eyes on the ceiling, as though seeking escape. Beside him, my brothers looked as if they'd swallowed knives. I reached into my briefcase, retrieving a small photograph, Grandma in her garden, her arms around me, as a toddler daisies at my feet. She wanted me here, I said softly, voice unwavering. In this seat. The room exhaled. My father rose, face ashen. Mia, he began, but no plea could bridge the chasm between us now. I collected the control certificates as they were handed to me one by one. Each one made a crisp, snapping sound as I signed my new name. The clerk's gavel pounded, sealing the transfer. Then, as the midday sun slanted higher, cameras flashed through the glass walls. I had arranged for discreet press invitations, breaking Carter family firm names, new CEO. Moments later, a reporter asked for comment. I smiled, voice calm. I'm honored to uphold Grandma's vision and to lead this company into its future. Outside, photographers darted in. My father's shoulders collapsed. Ethan's eyes brimmed anger or tears, I could not tell. Kyle's face twisted into a mask of shame. I turned to the assembled journalists. To those who never saw me, I said, gaze sweeping the room, I hope you finally understand who I am, because you will now see me at every turn. Flashbulbs popped. My voice echoed in the boardroom's high ceiling like a triumphal bell. A week later, trade journals ran headlines. Carter legacy transformed by young visionary family feud. Ends in stunning boardroom coup. Social media buzzed with admiration. Who knew Grandma's secret heir would shake Silicon Valley? I scrolled through the comments, a quiet satisfaction warming me. At home, my phone buzzed with frantic calls from my parents. I let them ring. My mother's message, please come home, let's talk. My father's, I'm so proud of you. But the girl who needed approval had died in that boardroom. Instead, I donned my leather jacket and drove to the tiny cafe where Ms. Toohey waited. She smiled knowingly as I entered. I slid into the booth opposite her, placing a newspaper clipping on the table, my photo headline blazing. She touched my hand. You did it, my granddaughter, she murmured. I squeezed her hand, tears bright. For Grandma, I whispered, voice thick. That evening, I walked through the corridors of the old family mansion, now empty since I had moved HQ downtown. I paused before the portrait of Grandma daisies at her lapel. I laid the boardroom certificate beside it. The golden frame glowed in the lamplight. My reflection shimmered in the glass, a woman forged from neglect and grief, now standing tall. The years of silence, of being pushed aside, had culminated in this moment. Undeniable, irreversible. I pressed my palm against the cold glass and said, I hope you see me now. And as the chandelier's light flickered, I turned and walked away, leaving behind the child, who once waited in shadows, and embracing the leader they could no longer ignore. The boardroom emptied quickly, but the ripple of shock spread far beyond those walls. Within hours, headlines blazed across every industry site, family empire seized by forgotten daughter, and Carter firm's stunning power shift. My father's office sat silent, empty glass of scotch untouched, as he stared at the overnight news feed scrolling on his computer. My brothers paced the marble foyer, voices tight with disbelief. Ethan's usually confident stride reduced to restless pacing. Kyle's charm evaporated into abrupt, angry texts begging for a reversal that would never come. Meanwhile, Messages poured into my inbox, congratulations from former classmates, praise from mentors, interview requests from major networks. Each notification felt like applause, a public vindication of every hour I'd spent in the shadows. I allowed myself a brief smile, but didn't gloat. Grandma's final wish was not about vengeance, but justice. In the days that followed, my parents reached out in desperation. My mother's voice cracked over voicemail. "Please, Mia, come home. We can fix this." My father's email, formal and trembling. "My deepest apologies. I underestimated you." I let them sit unread. Their remorse was hollow. The trust once broken could not be reclaimed with empty words. On the floor of my new corner office, I spread out congratulatory letters and press clippings. The skyline behind me sparkled as if celebrating. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes, and felt an unexpected lightness. The weight of invisibility had lifted. Across town at a charity gala for women's entrepreneurship, I took the stage to accept an award for Innovator of the Year. The crowd rose in a standing ovation long before I spoke. I thought of Grandma's smile, of Miss Tui's gentle nod, and whispered into the microphone, "This is for those who were told they didn't belong." By month's end, employee morale at the Carter firm had surged. The once stagnant divisions I'd targeted produced breakthroughs under my leadership: technology pilots, diversity initiatives, community partnerships. Board members who had backed me now gushed about our bold vision and fresh perspective. The company was thriving, validating every strategy I'd set in motion. And at home, the silence from my parents spoke volumes. They had lost control, but in that loss, they finally saw the strength they had overlooked. My brothers, humbled, avoided the topic. When we met at Grandma's grave, only a nod and a quick glance passed between us, acknowledging an unspoken shift in power. In the week that followed, I visited the cafe where Miss Tui waited. I slid into the booth, placing a fresh bouquet of daisies on the table. "We did it," I said softly. She smiled, eyes glistening. "You bloomed," she replied. As I walked away, the world no longer saw me as the quiet daughter, but as a force to be reckoned with. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to ask to be noticed. Thank you for joining me on this journey from invisibility to empowerment. Remember, our worth is not defined by those who overlook us, but by the strength we find within. My story began in silence, ignored awards, unanswered questions, a heart stiff with longing for a love that vanished when Grandma passed. Yet in the darkest moments, I discovered my own light and a purpose stronger than any neglect. When I learned I was adopted, everything shook, but it also freed me. I realized that the family who abandoned me could never erase my roots, because Grandma's love planted a seed no one could uproot. That seed grew into a fierce determination to honor her faith in me, to claim the legacy she dreamed of, and to demand the respect I deserved. Today I stand not as the overlooked daughter, but as a leader who reshaped an empire. The press has praised me, the board has rallied behind me, and my company thrives under a vision born from pain and perseverance. Yet none of that compares to the quiet moment I share now, sitting beside Grandma's photo, her gentle smile reminding me why I fought. The only person who truly loved me is gone, but I will carry her love forward in everything I do. If her story moved you, please like this video, subscribe for more real-life transformations, and share your own journey in the comments. You are not invisible, you are capable, and you are never alone. Story 2. I was halfway through the first sip of my lukewarm office coffee when the unknown number flashed on my phone. Something in my stomach twisted even before I answered. "Hello, is this Emily Carter?" The voice was polite, almost bored. "Yes," I said, trying to sound just as calm. "This is Charles from Liberty National Bank. We're calling regarding an overdue mortgage, $523,000. The rest of his sentence blurred. $523,000. I didn't own a house. I didn't even own a reliable car. You must have the wrong person, I managed. Ma'am, the documents list your full name, date of birth, and social security number. Loan opened 3 years ago. 3 years ago, right when my younger sister Jessica had been fantasizing about a forever home she couldn't afford. The call ended with a stiff promise to look into it, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely set the phone down. I tore through every drawer in my apartment, searching for some clue that would explain the mix-up. Deep down, though, I already felt the cold blade of betrayal sliding between my ribs. There was only one set of people who had all my personal information, and one of them had been looking for a shortcut ever since she was old enough to spell shortcut. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the hairline cracks in my ceiling and replayed every family dinner where Jessica was showered with praise while I washed dishes in the background. The responsible one, Mom called me. Translation, the convenient one, the one who will keep quiet. By dawn, I was at the kitchen table laptop, open tabs, multiplying mortgage fraud, forged signatures, what to do when family steals your identity. I called the bank again and asked for copies of the loan paperwork. 10 minutes later, a PDF landed in my inbox. There it was, page after page of my name, my details, my signature. It looked close enough to fool a stranger, but not close enough to fool the hand that had signed job applications and rent checks for the last 10 years. My real signature has a nervous hook in the Y of Emily. The forgery's tale was picture perfect and practiced. Seeing it felt like watching someone pick my pocket in slow motion, then smile for the camera. I should have cried. Instead, I felt something quieter and heavier settle in my chest, like wet cement hardening around a steel rod. This wasn't just about money. It was about being erased turned into an easy line of credit because I'd never been the noisy one. Mid-scroll through horror stories of identity theft, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Hope you're having a good week. Family dinner Sunday like everything was normal, like my name wasn't shackled to $500,000 of someone else's dream kitchen. I typed back, sure, and hit send. Before I confronted anyone, I needed the full picture and I needed a plan. Sunday would be the stage. I refused to improvise. Sunday showed up wearing the same cheerful mask my family always loved. Their lakefront house looked exactly like the brochures Jessica pinned to her vision boards. White siding wraparound porch, a manicured lawn that probably cost what I paid for rent. When Mom opened the door, she greeted me with a powder-scented hug. So glad you could make it, sweetheart. Inside, Dad sat half watching a football game, beer balanced on the armrest. Jessica lounged on the couch, scrolling her phone, a designer purse tossed beside her like a prop. Dinner smelled like pot roast and lemon cleaner nostalgia and new money mixed together. I took my usual chair heart, thumping hard enough to shake the silverware. Nobody noticed. They were busy praising Jessica's gorgeous new backyard and complaining about landscaping bills. I waited, let them get comfortable. Plates cleared, small talk fading. I spoke as evenly as I could. Quick question. Does anyone know anything about a mortgage in my name? Silence snapped across the table like a dropped tray. Jessica tugged her sleeves down. Mom's smile drooped. Dad coughed into his fist. No confessions, no apologies, just a family of bad actors caught without a script. Mom jumped in first. Honey, listen. Jessica just needed a little help qualifying for the loan. It's not like you're paying anything, sweetie. Jessica's voice sharpened. You have great credit, Em. I don't. And family helps. Family, why are you making this weird? Not a big deal, just paperwork. The words floated between us casual as crumbs. My jaw tingled with the urge to scream, but I kept my voice low, almost gentle. Thanks for explaining. Relief spread around the table, crisis apparently averted. Dad turned back to the game. Jessica picked up her phone. None of them saw the storm quietly forming behind my eyes. They thought the old Emily, the one who swallowed every slight, was still sitting there. They were wrong. I drove home on autopilot, white lines smearing into a single ribbon. Their phrases replayed, family helps, family just paperwork. Every sacrifice I'd ever made to be the dependable daughter. The one who didn't need attention came back coated in rust. Inside my cramped apartment, I opened my laptop again. This time, I wasn't Googling symptoms. I was mapping solutions lawyers who specialize in mortgage fraud steps to remove your name from a fraudulent loan, how to sue family members without nuking your credit in the process. The world felt sharper, colder, but for the first time in years, I felt awake. If they expected me to roll over, they didn't know me at all. I wouldn't shout or beg. I would be precise, methodical, and unflinching. Somewhere around 2 a.m., after outlining timelines and evidence lists, I closed the laptop. I wasn't sure exactly who I was becoming, only that she wouldn't stay invisible. Tomorrow I'd find a lawyer. After that, a police report. The path would be long and ugly, but it would be mine, and it would be silent until it wasn't. Mr. Warner looked nothing like the sleek TV lawyers who promise miracles before the commercial break. He was in his late 50s, hair the color of printer paper left in the sunsuit rumpled from actual work. We met in a downtown coffee shop that smelled of burnt espresso and stale hope. He slid my file across the table thick as a phone book and tapped the cover with a chewed-up pen. Identity theft, forged mortgage, 6 figures. Family members, he asked, eyebrows raised. Parents and a sister, I answered, voice low so the barista wouldn't hear. He nodded like a doctor confirming a broken bone. All right, first we file a police report today, then a written dispute to the bank. We request a fraud investigation and a temporary freeze on the loan. While that's churning, we talk civil suit damages, credit repair, maybe punitive if the judge is in a mood. His tone was calm, almost clinical, and that steadiness soothed the part of me still flinching. I signed engagement papers, handed over the retainer check that ate half my savings, and left with a to-do list stapled neatly to my future. The police station was colder than the January wind outside. Fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead as I recited the story for a stone-faced desk sergeant who typed so slowly the keyboard seemed to protest. When he stamped the report, identity theft criminal fraud case, 11884 to 25, a strange heat bloomed in my chest. Fear, relief, maybe both. Either way, it was official now. My family had committed a crime and I had named it. I walked out into sunlight that felt too bright for the day and mailed the certified dispute letter at the post office next door. The clerk slid it into the outgoing tray with a casual thunk, unaware the envelope held the first crack in my parents' perfect facade. 3 days of silence followed, 3 whole days where no one from home called, texted, or rang my bell. Part of me expected an apology parade. Mom's tears, Dad's bluster, Jessica's wounded princess act. Instead, there was only the hum of my refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock counting down to whatever came next. On the 4th evening, a car door slammed outside. I peeked through the blinds and saw Mom storming up my walkway, hair unbrushed, lipstick crooked. I opened the door but left the chain on. "How could you drag police into this?" she hissed. Not even a hello. "Do you know what you've done to this family?" I kept my voice level. I protected myself. It was a misunderstanding. Jessica needed help qualifying. Her eyes blazed with an anger I'd never seen aimed at me before. Anger reserved for outsiders, never for golden children. "Misunderstandings don't usually involve forged signatures," I said. "She's your sister Emily, family sacrifices." I almost laughed. Sacrifice is voluntary, theft isn't. Then before my courage wavered, I shut the door, slid the deadbolt, and leaned against the wood while her muffled protests faded down the steps. I didn't cry afterward. The tears had dried up sometime between the police station and that slammed door, replaced by a hollow ache that felt suspiciously like freedom. A week later, Liberty National sent an email mortgage account placed on hold pending fraud investigation. No payments due from Emily Carter. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. A hold wasn't a victory, but it was a ceasefire, and that was enough to breathe. Jessica's texts hit my phone that night, 12 in a row, alternating between fury and pleading. "You're ruining my life" morphed into, "I'll fix it, just withdraw the complaint." I muted the thread and went to bed. With the crisis paused, my life cracked open in unexpected ways. Saturday morning, I wandered the farmer's market, bought sunflowers I had no vase for, tasted summer peaches that dripped down my wrist. I signed up for a beginner pottery class because the flyer said, "No talent required," which felt like permission. Shaping clay was messy, humbling, weirdly meditative. The instructor, a bearded man named Cal, kept saying, "Let the wheel do the work." My bowls came out lopsided, but I loved them. Their imperfections proof my hands could build instead of just defend. Evenings I hiked a woodland trail behind the apartment complex, listening to my breath sink with the crunch of gravel. I'd spent years walking on eggshells. Sturdy ground felt miraculous. Meanwhile, Mr. Warner shepherded paperwork through the legal labyrinth: affidavits, subpoenas, notarized statements. Every few days, he emailed updates and bullet points, each one a chisel chip at the fraudulent loan. My credit score, once nosediving, began to twitch upward. The bank's internal audit finally confirmed what we'd known. The signatures were forged, income documents bogus, the title company negligent. Next step was civil court. We filed suit against Jessica, and by extension my parents' co-conspirators who had provided information knowingly and willfully. That phrase made my stomach flip. Mom and Dad distilled into a legal accusation. I expected rage. Instead, the family chat went eerily quiet. Birthdays passed without emoji cakes. Group photos disappeared from social media, as if deleting them could erase me. The silence stung, but it also clarified. When someone stops speaking, you hear the echo of what was never said. Years of unacknowledged effort, unseen compromises. I filled the space with new sounds: wheel hearer, hiking boots, the soft thud of wet clay on a table. 3 months after the initial call, Liberty National sent a certified letter loan, officially voided due to fraud. Emily Carter released from all liability. I held the envelope to my chest like a passport, debt-free, not by gift, but by grit. The same week, court set a mediation date. Jessica would have to face me across a conference table, lawyers present. I steeled myself for impact, but she postponed twice, citing emotional distress. The third time, the judge refused a delay. Morning of mediation, I dressed in a navy blazer that made me feel like someone who owned both her choices and her mistakes. Jessica arrived late, cheeks blotchy, parents flanking her like bookends. She couldn't meet my eyes. The mediator explained protocols. Jessica's lawyer offered a settlement, a modest cash payment, plus written apology if I dropped the civil suit. I listened, watched her twist a tissue until it shredded, and realized I felt nothing. No desire to punish, no urge to forgive. What I wanted was distance, a life where their crises could no longer breach my walls. So I countered, pay the legal fees, repair my credit, sign any document the court requires acknowledging the fraud. After that, we each go our separate ways. Permanently. My voice didn't shake. It was as steady as the wheel Cal kept praising. They huddled, whispered, weighed odds. Eventually, Jessica nodded, tears sliding unimpeded. The agreement was drafted, signed, notarized within the hour. When it was over, I walked out first, leaving them beneath the buzz of fluorescent lights. That night, I placed the notarized release in a fire-safe box under my bed, next to a growing collection of pottery pieces, crooked mugs, bowls with accidental waves. You could trace my learning curve in every wobble and scar, and somehow that made them beautiful. I brewed chamomile tea curled on the couch and whispered into the quiet apartment, I owe them nothing. The words felt weightless, like breath on glass, but they left behind a clear view of the future. Part courage, part clay, entirely mine. I used to think happy endings always sounded like trumpets, big brassy flourishes that announced, we made it reality. It turns out as softer. My ending began with something as unglamorous as a locksmith and a fresh coat of paint. 2 weeks after the mediation, I finally moved out of the shoebox apartment, where every wall still echoed that first phone call from the bank. I signed a 12-month lease on a modest duplex across town, built in the 70s, avocado green tile, still clinging to the kitchen backsplash like a bad memory. The place smelled of dust and possibility. While the locksmith swapped out the locks, I painted the living room wall a reckless shade of sunrise orange. Each brushstroke felt like pressing delete on a chapter nobody else was allowed to edit. Cal, my pottery instructor turned accidental friend, showed up with pizza and a drop cloth. We popped open cheap seltzers, balanced the box on upturned paint cans, and ate standing up. He asked if I planned to keep taking classes. I shrugged and said, I'm not sure if I was ever good, but the clay never lied to me. That made him grin. That's the whole point, he replied. Clay tells the truth quicker than people do. When he left, I wandered room to room barefoot, listening to floorboards creak under new ownership. I'd bought secondhand furniture on Facebook Marketplace, a corduroy couch the color of wet sand, a dining table scarred with pencil marks from some kid's homework battles. Nothing matched, but every piece came with a story, stories I chose, not ones my family forced on me. The settlement check arrived by certified mail, an amount large enough to cover my legal fees, repair my credit, and leave a safety cushion, but not so large that Jessica could call it life-ruining. She had borrowed money from my parents to pay it. Dad dipped into a retirement fund, Mom pawned her jewelry, and for once I felt no guilt. My therapist, Dr. Hayes, called it natural consequences. I called it gravity. You step off a ledge, you fall. Simple physics, nothing vindictive about it. I hired a financial planner, Ms. Tran, who spoke in soothing spreadsheets. First order of business, she said, was building a 6-month emergency fund. Second was opening a Roth IRA. The responsible daughter in me felt seen this time, on my own terms. I kept thinking how bizarre it was I'd been branded the reliable one all my life, yet I'd never actually owned reliability outright. It had always been a service I performed for others, unpaid and unthanked. Now it was mine to keep. Summer ripened. On weeknights, I biked the Greenway Trail after work, chasing twilight until the street lamps buzzed on. Cal sometimes tagged along, sometimes it was just me, the river, and the echo of cicadas. I felt my lungs expand past the old borders of anxiety, as if the muscles had discovered an extra inch of rib cage. And then, without warning, the letters began, one from Mom, one from Dad, several from Jessica. They arrived in tattered envelopes, each return address different, because they'd sold the lake house and were bouncing between rentals. I lined them up on the mantel like artifacts in a museum. Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C. Apologies, half apologies, metaphors about broken bridges, requests for a fresh start. Jessica's letters were the messiest ink blots where tears or coffee had smeared the words, please and sorry, into mud. I didn't open any of them. I told Dr. Hayes I was afraid curiosity would masquerade as compassion and drag me back into their orbit. She suggested a ritual: choose a time, open one letter a week, read it aloud, then decide, keep or discard, respond, or stay silent. Make the choice conscious, she said. Power lives in choosing. So, every Sunday evening, after I watered the succulents on the window ledge, I opened exactly one envelope. Mom's first. I sat at the dining table, phone on silent, breathing through my nose like Dr. Hayes taught me. Dear Emily, it began. No words can express. And there they were, excuses dressed as reflections. Accountability dodged behind phrases like, we were desperate, and we never thought it would hurt you. I felt my pulse quicken, old anger trying to stand up, but underneath was something sturdier: discernment. I folded the letter, slid it into a folder labeled Read, and wrote on the inside flap, no action required. Dad's letter the following week was shorter, full of bullet point logic about pensions, interest rates, how it just made sense on paper. I nearly laughed. On paper, a perfect description of my family's love looked tidy until you touched it and found the ink still wet. Into the folder it went. No action required. Jessica's first letter, 4 pages single-spaced, came with a printed quote from some self-help blog about forgiveness setting you free. She begged for a coffee meeting. She said therapy wasn't really sticking. She said she'd started selling handmade candles online to offset debt, and maybe I'd like a discount code. I scrawled on the folder, flap boundaries stronger than wax. No action required. After the last envelope was opened, the folder felt heavier than its paper contents. But the weight wasn't dread, it was clarity. I placed it in the back of my filing cabinet behind utilities and insurance forms, a reminder that history could be documented without being replayed. In early September, Cal invited me to a local art fair where his ceramics collective rented a booth. He offered me a corner of the table if you're brave enough to show the world your wobbly cups. I laughed and said yes, because fear was a muscle I wanted to stretch, not avoid. I priced my pieces low, $10 here, $15 there, thinking nobody buys amateur pottery when mass-produced perfection sits 2 aisles over. But people did buy. A woman with silver braids ran her fingers along the rim of a sky-blue bowl and whispered, "There's personality in the wobble." A teenager chose a mug with a crooked handle, declaring it TikTok aesthetic. By noon, more than half my inventory was gone. Every sale felt like a small apology from the universe for the signatures stolen in my name. Late afternoon, as we packed up the unsold pieces, Cal nudged me. "How does it feel?" "Like my life has fingerprints now," I said. "That's the point," he answered, echoing his first lesson. Clay tells the truth faster than people. October rolled in crisp and gold. I spent a Saturday hanging string lights across the tiny backyard, then invited a handful of colleagues for chili and board games. We played until midnight, laughing at inside jokes that hadn't existed 6 months ago. At some point, I caught myself scanning the group, wondering if any of them would secretly forge my name one day. The thought vanished as quickly as it came, chased off by a louder truth: trust is a risk worth taking, and I refused to let betrayal rent space in every friendship. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood under the lights alone. The yard smelled like fallen leaves and leftover spice. I remembered being a kid catching fireflies in a jar while Jessica complained the bugs were gross. I opened my fists and pretended I was letting all the old ghosts out. Winter arrived with a thin, showy snowfall. The local news hyped as the snowpocalypse. Schools closed, businesses followed suit. I worked from home, laptop balanced on a thrift store desk, wearing fuzzy socks and sipping cocoa. Around noon, a text flashed on my phone from an unknown number. "It's Jessica. Emergency. Please call." My chest tightened. Old reflex. I stared at the message long enough for the phone to dim. Then I opened the mediation paperwork page, 7 Clause 4. No direct contact regarding financial matters. Communication through counsel only. I forwarded the text to Mr. Warner with a brief note, FYI. He replied 3 minutes later, "I'll handle it." I spent the rest of the snow day building a lopsided snowcat in the front yard, complete with whiskers made from twigs. Neighbors walking dogs waved. One asked if I took commissions. I pretended to negotiate 2 hot chocolates per sculpture. We laughed. The snowcat melted in 2 days, but every time I opened the front door, I saw footprints in the slush, evidence that connection had stopped. Bye, said hello, and left me smiling. In March, Ms. Tran and I reviewed my finances over almond croissants. My emergency fund was healthy retirement on track, and a travel budget glinted like a plane ticket on the horizon. She asked if I had family obligations to consider aging parents' college funds for nieces or nephews. I shook my head. Not anymore. I'm the only name in my ledger. It sounded lonely, but it felt clean. That night, I booked a long weekend flight to Portland, a city I'd never seen. I chose a guest house with a clawfoot tub and a view of the Willamette River. I emailed Cal. Think the Clay Collective would survive without me for 4 days. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji and a joke about missing my signature wobbles. Portland was drizzly and green and smelled like roasted coffee. I wandered Powell's books for hours, tracing spines, buying novels I'd promised myself I'd read someday. I hiked Forest Park, let moss soak into my sneakers, and realized my life was expanding. No grand gestures, just a series of doorways I'd finally noticed were open. Back home, spring unveiled daffodils along the duplex fence line. I planted herbs in mismatched pots, labeling them with dollar store sticks, basil mint courage. One Saturday morning I caught myself humming while watering them. I didn't recognize the tune, which made sense. My life was composing original music now. The next letter from Jessica came certified, which meant official. I accepted it, heartbeat steady, and opened it at the kitchen counter. Inside was a single page. I've entered a debt relief program. The counselor says I need to make amends one last time. I know you don't owe me forgiveness, but I'm sorry. I'm also pregnant. Due in November. I hope this baby grows up learning better habits than I did. I reread the letter twice. Surprise flickered, followed by a softer emotion, whose name I couldn't grasp. Not forgiveness. Something less tidy. Recognition, maybe. Babies are blank pages, and I wanted this one to start with a cleaner story than mine. I folded the letter and slipped it into the folder, writing "New life, new lane. No action required, yet." July marked 1 year since the bank's call. I commemorated the day by driving to the ocean, 3 hours east, windows down, music loud. At the shore, I walked barefoot across hot sand, then waded ankle-deep into waves that tugged like playful thieves. I closed my eyes and let the horizon widen my lungs. I thought about all the invisible contracts we sign without noticing. Be the easy child. Absorb the fallout. Smile, nod, pay the bill. Breaking those contracts hadn't made me hard. It had made me honest. Honest felt like sunshine on saltwater, sting and warmth at the same time. On the drive back, I rehearsed how I'd describe the past year, if anyone bothered to ask. Something simple like, I learned that family can be a verb you choose, not just a noun you inherit. Or maybe I stopped calling loyalty what was really silence. The phrasing didn't matter as much as the fact I could say it without my throat locking up. Late summer, Cal and I rented a booth at the big regional craft fair. I unveiled a new series bowls with jagged edges intentionally left untrimmed, glazed midnight blue so the raw clay peeked through like fault lines. I called them my honesty bowls. Everyone sold. A gallery owner asked if I'd consider a solo exhibit next year. I said I'd think about it, but inside a part of me already whispered yes. That night, back at my duplex, Cal stayed for takeout Thai and Netflix. Between chopstick bites, he nudged an envelope my way. Early birthday gift, he said. Inside was a business card, Carter Clay Company embossed in teal. My throat tightened again, but not from fear. We made a pact I'd apply for a vendor license he'd help with kiln space. Partnership properly notarized by laughter and pad thai sauce. September brought Jessica's baby shower invite via email. The subject line read, "No pressure, but I wanted you to know." Attached was an ultrasound photo, tiny profile, fist raised like a question. I stared at the image, heart warring with head. Dr. Hayes had warned me, forgiveness is a door you can open slowly or never at all, but rushing through is how you sprain your peace. I hit reply, typed, "Thank you for sharing. Wishing you both health," and pressed send. Nothing more. Door cracked, not flung wide. The first kiln firing for Carter Clay Company happened on a chilly October evening. Cal and I stood outside the studio, heat seeping through the metal walls, smelling like campfire and rain. When the timer beeped, we opened the hatch and peered in rows of bowls, mugs, vases glowing like embers. I felt my shoulders loosen, realization settling. I used to think survival was the opposite of creation. Turns out they're cousins. One clears the ground, the other plants seeds. We celebrated with greasy tacos and sparkling water, toasting paper cups. 2 to new chapters, Cal said. I added, and to never letting anyone else write the dedication page. November arrived with the news Jessica had delivered a healthy baby girl named Hope. A mutual cousin texted me photos, soft cheeks, eyes shut tight against hospital lights. I stared longer than I intended, then tucked the phone away. Dr. Hayes would be proud I felt the emotion fully, then let it exit stage left no encore. That weekend I mailed a small box to the newborn, inside a palm-sized ceramic star, glazed sunrise orange, the exact shade of my living room wall. No note, no return address, just a star delivered to a fresh universe. On New Year's Eve, I invited friends to the duplex for potluck. The wobbly cup community had grown potters, co-workers, neighbors. The locksmith who had changed my locks now brought sourdough starter. We counted down to midnight, popped confetti, kissed cheeks, clinked mismatched mugs. I looked around and realized I'd built something my childhood never promised a family that didn't require paperwork or suffering to prove itself. At 12:04 a.m., when the noise settled into playlists and half-eaten desserts, I slipped outside. Stars pinpricked the sky. I breathed cold air and whispered, "I'm free." The words didn't echo, they landed softly, absorbed by the night, as if the universe was nodding back. I thought about that first phone call again, how it had cracked my life open, like a fault line. But cracks, I'd learned, aren't just breaks. They're invitations for light to seep in. And light, once it enters, starts looking for other dark corners to claim. So, here's my trumpetless ending. A woman standing under winter stars, feet steady on ground. She chose heart, steady in a chest that finally fits. No grand chords, just a quiet hum that sounds exactly like truth. And that is enough. Story 2. They didn't even hold off till the attorney finished speaking. She won't receive anything. Dad detested her. My sister Karen stated as much. As soon as I entered the room, no salutations. Avoid making eye contact. Just that scathing, piercing statement, loud enough to be heard by all. As if she intended it to reverberate. The words struck me like a blow to the chest. My hold on my son. Warm and shaking, Eli's little fingers wrapped back around mine as his grasp tightened. Thin and unsteady, I forced a grin down at him. However, he was aware. He was constantly aware. Not that I had sat down yet. However, the message was unambiguous. I wasn't invited. I wasn't related. Simply put, I was a loose end. To snip clean was their purpose. With her black hair scraped into the tight ponytail she usually wore when she wanted to appear superior, Karen sat at the head of the table, poised in a gray pantsuit. She had a bright red lipstick. Traditional. Karen was painted for a fight I was unaware I had entered. The voice I feared even more then appeared. Rick, my uncle. Dad's oldest brother chuckled dryly. With his fingers interlaced behind his head, he reclined on his chair. His self-satisfied grin spreads across his face like grease. Rick said, pointing to Eli as if he were not even human. Even her child knows she's worthless. Eli dropped his gaze to the ground. Around the room, my heart broke a bit more. A few people nodded their heads. I hadn't seen my cousin's former neighbors, relatives, or acquaintances in a long time. I wasn't on the side of those who had long before chosen a side. I took a deep breath. It was like sandpaper in my throat. The scent of leather seats dust and whatever extremely sweet perfume Karen had been wearing filled the air. My ears were able to detect my pulse. Hot and loud. Embarrassing. I walked Eli away from the pack to the farthest chair at the end of the long mahogany table. When I sat down, the chair creaked. With his legs hanging over the floor, Eli crawled up next to me. He appeared to be attempting to blend into thin air as his hands folded in his lap. Karen gently moved her head in my direction, and as our gazes locked, she gave me a cold grin. Just poison sympathy. You are aware of the futility of this. Karen, my sister, spoke in a cool, silky voice. Dad revised the will and excluded you entirely. Told him you were dead. I didn't answer. I was unable to. My mouth felt heavy with my tongue. Useless. I gave a little nod as if I understood, but on the inside. What made me come at all, I assumed that there may be a sign, a line, or a remark. He recalled me. Something to bring everything together. Rather, I found myself back where I had vowed never to go again. People all around me made it obvious that they had buried me long before they buried him. And before I could get up to go, they began vulture-like chopping up the estate. The door opened with a squeak. My father's attorney, Mr. Connors, came into the room with a heavy folder under his arm. His face was unrevealing, his eyes were sleepy, and his face was perfectly pressed. There was silence in the room. Everyone straightened their posture a bit. It was this. I prepared myself for embarrassment. I had no expectations before I arrived, and I would depart with just that. Or so I believed. For what reason nobody knew in that room. Not Rick, not Karen, not even myself. Was my son there? There was something Eli had brought, and he would disprove all they believed they understood in a single statement. He filmed a video, but you forgot it. I hadn't been in a space like this with my family in 8 years. I packed up a life they thought I didn't deserve 8 years ago. Without turning around, he took Eli only 2 at a time and walked away. I had to do it, not because I wanted to, because there was never a word spoken to my father Charles, or yelling, because every family get-together was like smiling for the camera while barefooting over glass. However, I had returned, back in a room that still had the odor of ancient rage and cigar smoke. The irony, I had no idea that I had been asked to the will. 3 days after the funeral, the envelope was read. Just the date and time, no notes. Connor's formal script for an address. I briefly pondered whether it was an error. Perhaps it was intended for Karen, or perhaps it was merely a cruel farewell joke. However, Eli desired to leave. His soft, wide eyes were fixed on me. He spoke in a quiet but confident tone. He said, "Mom, we should go. Perhaps you need to hear something." I'm not sure how a 10-year-old can possess such wisdom, but he does. There are moments when I believe he sees the world in ways that most adults never do. So, we arrived. He wore a small button-up shirt that he had chosen himself, and I wore the simple black dress that I hadn't worn since my mother's funeral. I braided his hair that morning with trembling hands, and he told me I looked beautiful. He didn't know I had barely slept, that I was terrified to face the people who'd treated me like a ghost. For nearly a decade, I knew what they thought of me. Karen, the perfect daughter. She stayed, she helped, she took care of Dad. She made sure everyone saw her doing it too. She told the story so many times it became gospel. Julia abandoned the family. Julia couldn't handle real life. Julia ran away. They never asked why I left. They didn't know or didn't care. The dad stopped speaking to me after I refused to stay in a marriage that was tearing me apart. That when I showed up on his porch with Eli in a suitcase, he shut the door without saying a word. That the one person who was supposed to protect me from the world had become another wall. I had to break through. Uncle Rick didn't help. He was Dad's echo, always repeating the same bitter phrases. Family doesn't quit. Blood is loyalty. Don't come back crying. And Karen. She soaked it all up and turned it into a script she could weaponize. So I stopped trying. I built a quiet life for Eli and me. We didn't have much, but we had peace and love and laughter. Still, part of me held on to the smallest, most fragile hope that maybe in the end Dad had seen something, regretted something, left something behind. Maybe that's why I opened the envelope, why I showed up. But now, sitting in that room surrounded by hard eyes and smug smiles, I felt foolish for hoping Eli hadn't said a word since we sat down. He sat straight, hands in his lap, eyes scanning the room like he was studying each face. His calm unnerved me a little, like he was waiting for something. And then Mr. Connors cleared his throat and opened the folder. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, "Just get through this. Don't let them see you break." But Eli, he was sitting on something bigger than grief. And before this was over, he'd prove he was the only one in the room truly listening to my father. Mr. Connors cleared his throat again, the way lawyers do when they want the room's attention without actually asking for it. He adjusted his glasses, flipped open the folder, and began reading the will like it was just another Tuesday. I barely heard the first few lines. Generic legal stuff, estate definitions, executor declarations. My mind was spinning not with what he was saying, but with what I knew was coming. He wouldn't say my name. I was sure of it. Still, every time he paused to turn a page, I held my breath, like maybe, just maybe, the next words would be different. Maybe he'd surprise me, but now it was all the usual suspects to my daughter, Karen. I leave the primary residence and all its contents. Karen's face didn't move, but I could feel her satisfaction, like perfume wafting across the table. She glanced sideways at her husband, Neil, who gave her a smug little nod like they were already planning renovations. To my brother Rick, the lake property, and all remaining shares in the family business. With his arms crossed and his chin up like a king looking over his new realm, Rick reclined even more in his chair. I saw him gently bite down on the cigar after sliding it back between his teeth, as if he had already won something from my nephew Paul, the collection of vintage cars. When I was 9 years old, Paul, my cousin, locked me out of my own room just to see me cry. I bit the inside of my cheek to prevent my face from breaking Paul. Tears were hot and stinging as they gathered behind my eyes. I didn't let them fall, though. I have yet to be mentioned. no footnote at all. The line I had been dreading then appeared. As previously stated, a portion of this estate will not be given to my daughter Julia. It was there, easy, final, similar to a door that closes. It was as if someone had punched me in the chest. Beneath the table, Eli's fingers found mine. My hands were clenched in my lap, but I was completely unaware of it. Before I drifted too far, his touch anchored me and brought me back. Behind my eyes, I could feel my heartbeat. It burned my skin. The whispers followed, low but deliberate. The softest scarf was released by Karen. "Told you." She spoke softly to Neil. Uncle Rick shook his head as if everything had been expected. To leave her own father is a sign of a certain type of person. He spoke more loudly than he had to. Little was said by the others, the cousins, or the so-called family friends. They were equally silent. I gazed down at the table's wood grain. The spiraling and twisting lines were almost mesmerizing. Compared to their faces, that was easier to look at. Inside my head, I could hear the hollow, flat sound of my own voice. What brought me here? What made me believe he would remember me? Then Eli shifted. He sat up straighter and released my hand. Before I could see the change, I could feel it. Like a tiny blade, his voice sliced through the tension. Unshakable, but soft. He filmed a video, but you forgot it. The room went cold. Karen blinked. Rick pivoted. Mr. Connors hesitated. The pen remains above the page. I looked over at Eli. My mind is flooded with confusion. Which video? Eli wasn't looking at me when I asked, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. He was staring straight ahead. Steady. Sure. A tiny white envelope, slightly crumpled, but tightly sealed, came out of his backpack. Dad's handwriting for the lawyer was underneath my name, which was on the front. Only if things become ugly. Eli had figured it out before me. Then for the first time in the day, I sensed a change in the room's equilibrium. As if it were radioactive, I gazed at the envelope in my son Eli's hands. So calmly he held it, like it wasn't the most dangerous object in the room. But my eyes were locked on the handwriting across the front, sharp all caps. Unmistakable. My father's for the lawyer, only if things become ugly. Well, it had gotten ugly. I could barely find my voice. Eli, where did you get that? He looked up at me, his expression soft but steady. Grandpa gave it to me a while ago. He told me to keep it safe. My heart stuttered. He gave it to you. He nodded. The day we visited him. Just me and him. You were at work. I blinked hard, trying to pull memory into focus. I remembered that day Eli had asked if he could go with my neighbor to drop off something at Dad's. It was the first time I'd let him go without me. I had no idea they even spoke. Now Mr. Connors reached across the table. May I? He asked gently, and Eli handed the envelope over without hesitation. The entire room leaned in. Karen was squinting like she couldn't make sense of it. Rick shifted in his seat, no longer slouched. For once, nobody had anything to say. The envelope made a quiet, tearing sound as Connors opened it. Inside was a USB drive. Small, black, ordinary. But my pulse kicked like it was a grenade. Connors furrowed his brow and pulled a note from the envelope to another page in my father's handwriting. His eyes scanned it, and for the first time since he walked into the room, his composure cracked just slightly. But I saw it. He didn't speak right away. He just nodded slowly, like something unspoken had been confirmed. Everyone. Connor said, his voice quieter now. There is a video message from Charles Thomas recorded before the final version of this will. It was sealed with instructions to be played only if this situation became contentious. His eyes flicked to Karen, then Rick. They both shifted in their chairs. Karen scoffed. This is ridiculous. He didn't say anything about a video. Uncle Rick leaned forward, voice harder now. We don't know what's even on that thing. Could be fake. Connors raised a hand. It's time-stamped, authenticated. I recognize the handwriting and signature, and per his instructions, I'm legally bound to play it. He plugged the USB into a sleek black laptop sitting on the desk beside him. The screen flickered to life, the logo dissolving into a black frame with a single word, play. The air in the room changed. No one spoke. No one moved. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. I gripped the arms of my chair like they might keep me from floating off into some other world. My breathing was shallow, shaky. Why would Dad leave a video? Why do? Eli. What could he possibly want to say now, after everything? Eli didn't look nervous. He just sat still, eyes on the screen, like he already knew what was coming. Karen looked pale now. Her lips were pressed into a tight line. Rick had stopped chewing his cigar. I wanted to run. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But mostly I wanted to know. Connors hit the space bar. The screen went black for half a second, then flickered, and suddenly, there he was, my father, older, thinner, sitting at his desk, wearing that navy sweater I bought him for his last birthday. The one I didn't know he'd ever worn. His hands were folded, his expression not cold, just tired. He looked straight into the camera, and then he started to speak. I didn't breathe. Not when the screen lit up, not when I saw his fuss, not when I heard the first two words. Leave his mouth. Hi, Julia. He appeared older than I had recalled. He was thinner now. My father, Charles Thomas, was still seated at that weathered oak desk with the antique globe behind him, though his once proud stance had softened, like we did as children. This time, though, his face wasn't cold or aloof. It was a person. If you're watching, he added, I'm leaving. Additionally, I'm assuming that the reading went poorly. His fingers twitched as he clasped his hands in front of him, a slight nervousness. I was forced to. I didn't think you and the family would get along. I am aware of their opinions of you. Hell, I am aware of my remarks regarding you. He swallowed and looked down. I was also mistaken. My throat tightened with breath. My fingernails sunk into my chair's armrest. I couldn't take my eyes off Eli as he looked up at me. Karen told me, and I believed it. I thought Rick was real. I thought you left because you didn't give a damn. I made no inquiries. You didn't get my attention. Not once. You made an effort. In front of you, I closed the door. On Eli and you. Karen's sharp, uneasy shifting in her chair caught my attention. I kept my eyes off of her. I was unable to. Dad's voice broke. Almost. I believed pride was a prerequisite for strength, that it was betrayal to walk away. But power, strength is emerging. It's for your child's protection. You also did that. What I couldn't do, you did. His eyes were sparkling. My own vision became blurry. One day Eli dropped by and I met him. Only the two of us. That child. When I asked him about you, he merely said without saying much else, the safest place on earth is my mom. I put my hand to my mouth. Julia, I lost you. Now I see that. I couldn't stop being right long enough to love you the way you needed, which is why I lost my daughter. However, I will not allow my final act to drive you away once more. He stared directly into the camera after clearing his throat. Steady. I therefore modified the will. The entire room let out a collective gasp. A chair made a creaking sound. Rex, perhaps. Although I couldn't hear it, Karen muttered something. My father's voice was the only sound I could make out. Eli and you have the house to yourself. The retirement fund, the savings. You own it. And a trust for Eli's college education. I want you to have the peace I was unable to provide while I was living, even though I know it won't make up for what I broke. After a moment, he leaned in closer to the camera. And let them be angry if they are. This is something you earned. Despite everything, you continued to be a mother. I never could have done that. I got a lump in my throat. I was too big to breathe. You have my admiration. Julia, I also adore you. Did, every time. I simply had no idea how to demonstrate it. Then he added softly, right before the video went black, look after my grandson. Tell him thank you. The screen turned black. No transition, no music, nothing but quiet. Pure still. There is holy silence all around me. Chair squeaked. I remained motionless as someone sniffed. I covered my mouth as I sat there. I felt like something I didn't even realize I was carrying had finally been lifted, and tears were streaming down my cheeks. After all the years of clamor, guilt, banishment, and quiet, I was heard by him. At last he listened to me, and in the quiet that followed, no one could take that away. No one spoke when the screen went black. Not Karen, not Rick, not the cousins or the family. Friends who once smiled politely while ignoring the weight I carried. Even Mr. Connors sat still, his hand frozen above the mouse as if stopping. The video had also stopped time, and maybe, in a way, it had. I don't know how long I sat there. My hand was still over my mouth. My cheeks were wet, but I hadn't noticed the tears falling until I felt Eli's hand slip into mine again. He wasn't crying. He just looked up at me with this small, knowing smile, like he'd been waiting the whole time for the truth to finally find a voice. I leaned down and kissed the top of his head. My heart ached with something too big for words. Love's relief. Breathe. All nodded together across the room. Karen stood abruptly. Her chair screeched against the floor. She picked up her bag with shaking hands and walked out without a word. Her husband trailed behind, red in the face, mumbling something under his breath. Rick stayed seated longer, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on nothing. When he finally stood, he looked at Connors like he wanted to argue, but even he knew there was nothing to fight. My father had spoken. His truth was now unignorable. The others followed one by one. Some couldn't meet my eyes. A few offered quiet nods. Pity or maybe respect. I couldn't tell. Soon it was just the three of us left. Connors gently closed the folder and cleared his throat. "There will be some paperwork," he said, voice softer than before. "But everything's in order." I nodded. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? He gave a small smile, genuine, and left us alone in the room. The silence that followed wasn't the same kind I had grown used to. This silence was peaceful, whole, like something had finally settled into place. I looked at Eli, still holding my hand, still looking at me like I was the strongest person in the world. And perhaps I was in his eyes. However, it was he who saved me, who transports that envelope as if it were a piece of paper, not the reality. Everything would be rewritten. We lingered a bit longer. I have no idea why. Perhaps I simply needed some breathing room. Perhaps I just wanted to sit in the one room where I felt like I belonged for the first time in a long time. In my mind, I kept hearing my father's voice. "You have my admiration." I thought I would never hear those 3 words. I needed those words more than I ever realized. I considered everything I had in my possession. Years of being erased, blamed, and kept silent. I wasn't erased now either. I was heard, seen, and recalled. I gave Eli another glance. "Thank you," I said in a whisper. He cocked his head. "For what purpose? For having more courage than I do." "For clinging to something that was important," I said. He grinned. "All I wanted was for you to hear him. I had too, not only in the film, but also in the subsequent shift in the composition that occupied the room after everyone else had departed. The problem with truth is that, when it does, it transforms everything, but it doesn't always happen when you want it to." So, no, I wasn't broken when I left that room. My father's words were still reverberating in my chest as I walked out holding my son's hand. I left completely, and that quiet. At last there was significance in that silence. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt like your voice wasn't important, been ignored, or been misunderstood, please share. Just be aware of this. You're not invisible, and sometimes it takes time to discover the truth. However, if you had any feelings while listening, they will surface. Kindly like this video and forward it to someone who might also benefit from hearing it. Only when you assist those in need of travel do stories like these get to them. And this is the kind of story you want, if you want more genuine, unvarnished, and heartfelt tales. Remember to sign up for the channel. There's still so much to reveal. Stay strong till the next time. Be kind, and never forget that your voice counts.